I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.
Hello there, Price of Reason here with a series review. She-Hulk Attorney at Law is one of the poorest quality MCU projects ever released, but with episode 9 being the season finale, some people, myself included, were at least curious to see how this train wreck of a show would end. After watching episode 9, I can now confirm that She-Hulk showrunner Jessica Gao and her ragtag team of incompetent writers have stayed true to their, brand and laid another egg. While they could have made an effort to try and conclude the overall story in some coherent way, instead, they ended up with one of the biggest finale fumbles that I've ever seen on a show that already was one of the worst ever made in any genre. Episode 9 starts with an homage to the original 1978 Incredible Hulk starring Bill Bixby and Lou Ferrigno, only applied to Jen Walters. While this concept may have actually worked on a well-written satire show, in this case, all it made me think of was how great the 1978 show was and how crappy this one is. It also didn't help that the writers seemingly used this retro intro as yet another excuse to attack disappointed MCU fans. Again. Anyhow, it turns out that this intro was just a dream, and Jen is actually in the same type of jail Tim Roth was held in. Jen is visited by Mallory Book, her cheerleader paralegal friend, and of course, Mr. Poopy. Jen wants them to help her find the toxic male man-baby trolls that hacked into her phone and released her secretly filmed sex tape to the public. Book tells Jen that they have to now focus on Jen's legal troubles before anything else. Apparently, the DA has offered to release Jen, but only if she wears an inhibitor that will keep her from transforming into She-Hulk. Now wait a minute. Didn't Bruce Banner say that his inhibitor was a prototype and that no other inhibitors existed? If so, how did the authorities have inhibitors to give both Jen and Tim Roth, especially with Bruce being on an entirely different planet?
Hey, don't worry about that. Take a load off. Don't think about it. Look over here.
Anyhow, Jen agrees to wear the inhibitor. Then she is fired from her job. Then she immediately vacates her apartment and moves in with her parents, implying that she's broke, which is odd considering the type of salary a top lawyer at this firm would supposedly be making. I guess maybe she also has a gambling problem, or maybe she spends a lot of money on blow, or maybe both. Anyways, the media is now constantly chasing her and talking about her. In an interview, her former toxic male coworker says that they used to date and that she's always been a psycho, bringing his character arc to a very, satisfying conclusion. You see, he started the show as a toxic male douche, and now he's a very toxic male douche. That's some real character growth right there. Jen continues to try and put all the pieces of the puzzle together, but she still can't figure out who the leader of the toxic man-baby forum is. Her cheerleader paralegal friend tries to help her when Jen's mother barges in and randomly shows them a clip of Jen twerking in law school, because Jen twerking was absolutely what this show needed more of, right? Anyhow, after not being able to reach Bruce Banner, Jen decides to go to Tim Roth's yoga retreat to get away from her troubles. Meanwhile, Jen's cheerleader paralegal friend decides to upload Jen's law school twerking video to the Toxic Man-Baby forum. How did she get a copy of it?
Hey, relax, guy.
As planned, once she uploads Jen's twerking video, she automatically gets invited to a top-secret Toxic Man-Baby party, because of course, that's how top-secret forums work. Since the Toxic Man-Baby forum now thinks she's a man, Jen's cheerleader paralegal friend recruits Mr. Poopy to go to the party in her place. Jen shows up at Tim Roth's yoga retreat and reconnects with the guy who assaulted her and then tried to steal her blood. For some reason, he still never bothers to tell her who hired him or why he was asked to assault her, and she doesn't bother to ask. It's as if the writers have just completely forgotten the events of their own series. Again. Meanwhile, Mr. Poopy infiltrates the Toxic Man-Baby party, and he hears douchey male ists and phobes all complain about She-Hulk. This is yet another gaslighting attempt by the writers, creating the false narrative that if you don't like this show, you are a terrible person, especially if you're a male. Even worse, the show once again tries to blend legitimate criticism that people may actually have with toxic comments against women in order to discredit any real criticism from anybody. Sadly, this has become the industry standard these days. The very companies that claim to champion accountability culture refuse to be held accountable for producing a poor product, so they attack their customers instead. While he's at the party, Mr. Poopy has to keep getting instructions from Jen's cheerleader paralegal friend because even though he's a successful lawyer at a top law firm, he's also a man, so on this show, he has to be presented as a dim-witted buffoon. In a twist that most people saw coming, it turns out that geeky fanboy douche is actually the leader of the toxic man-baby forum because on a show that constantly attacks its own male viewers, it really couldn't have been anybody but him. Geeky fanboy douche is exactly how showrunner Jessica Gao and her bitter writer/activist friends all see straight men, and this show is a safe space for them to express their feelings, however petty and spiteful. Just when you thought that this show couldn't get any worse, it somehow manages to do just that with a final series of events that miraculously manage to bring this episode, this series, and the entire MCU to yet another new all-time low. Again. After speaking with her nice guy assailant, Jen learns that Tim Roth isn't in the house because he went down to his lodge where a private event is taking place. In another twist that everybody saw coming, it turns out that the private event is actually the toxic man-baby party, and Tim Roth is speaking there as the Abomination. Jen is upset that Tim Roth knowingly violated his parole by removing his inhibitor, but then Jen's cheerleader paralegal friend and Mr. Poopy tell her that this is the toxic man-baby forum event party. Tim Roth seemingly didn't know the nature of the event when he agreed to host it, which also doesn't make much sense, but at this point, does it really even matter? Then, geeky fanboy douche tells Jen that not only is he the leader of the toxic man-baby forum, he also paid evil simp to get her blood when he spent the night with her. This actually raises another issue that I've never understood. Why did evil simp need an industrial-sized syringe in order to get Jen's blood? She wasn't She-Hulk when they were together, and how could he have used such a syringe and taken so much blood without Jen ever noticing?
Hey, relax, guy.
Anyhow, geeky fanboy douche injects Jen's blood, and with the help of some terrible CGI, he transforms into the incredible dude bro. Then Titania shows up for some reason. Again. Then Tim Roth, as the Abomination, tries to help Jen, but Bruce Banner shows up and thinks Tim Roth is actually trying to hurt her, so they start fighting. At this point, Jen breaks the fourth wall and says that these storylines don't make any sense, so she breaks off her inhibitor, turns into She-Hulk, and using the Disney Plus menu, transports herself into Marvel Studios, where she goes to the writer's room and complains about the show's writings. For those of you who missed it, after the real-life writers of this show have already used self-insert characters of themselves in previous episodes, this time they decided to physically insert themselves. That is why showrunner Jessica Gao actually appears as a writer on the show in the writer's room, along with several other women and a few, men? Anyhow, the writers tell Jen that only Kevin can decide where the story is going, and after beating up some security men, she goes to visit him at Marvel Studios. Just when it seems that perhaps Marvel president Kevin Feige himself would make an appearance on this crappy show, it turns out that Kevin is actually an AI computer that comes up with formulaic storylines for the MCU. Jen confronts him about this, so he tells her that she can finish the story the way that she wants. So even after breaking the fourth wall, Jen acts like a Karen, demands to speak with a manager, and then, of course, gets her way because she's the best. So this cop-out of an episode ends with geeky fanboy douche getting arrested and Daredevil showing up for no apparent reason. Titania, who tried to kill people in episode 1, is once again free with nobody questioning it. Tim Roth is going back to jail for violating his parole terms by taking off his inhibitor. This makes Jen very happy because to her it means Tim Roth is being held accountable for his actions, even though she also took off her inhibitor and she should be accountable for the same exact actions. So in reality, if men and women were indeed equal, she would be going to jail as well. But once again, with no explanation, a complete double standard is applied to men and women on this show. Next, Jen is having a family barbecue with Matt Murdock as her guest when Bruce shows up with his long-lost son, Shrek. Then, in the show's final scene, Jen is walking into court while being hassled by a toxic male reporter that also talks down to her. She tells him that she's going to be a lawyer and a superhero, even though this show has proven that much like its showrunner, she's incompetent in both. In a post-credit scene, Wong teleports Tim Roth out of jail, and then this piece of shit of a season and hopefully series finally ends. And there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. A series that will likely go down as one of the worst ever made. A $225 million debacle that is already being called the world's most expensive therapy session for a bunch of unrelatable, middle-aged, bitter women that live in a bubble and hate men. And to make matters worse, right after the finale, the showrunners, producers, and even She-Hulk actress Tatiana Maslany all did a victory lap in an interview with Variety magazine, saying that the show successfully delivered a big "fuck you" to toxic Marvel trolls. According to them, they had anticipated in advance the exact type of criticism they'd get for making this show, and they were able to tackle this criticism head on. Now, this is already beyond gaslighting. This is 100% bullshit. She-Hulk was never a controversial character with men prior to this show. Although you could say she was derivative, she's still considered a legacy character that has existed for decades with her own story. Her comics have historically been popular with men, who are also the main demographic that has spent money on buying them. So basically, all Jessica Gao and her bitter activist friends were doing were attacking their own customers. And just to be clear, the main criticism about this show was that it had an anti-male agenda and that the writing was poor. That had the writers stuck to the original source material, especially She-Hulk's origin story as written by the late and great Stan Lee, this show could have appealed to a wide audience and appealed most MCU fans. The writers don't get to avoid this type of criticism by attacking men, and that Variety magazine once again takes part in these types of attacks shows how corrupt the access media is these days and how broken Hollywood has become. Now, I know some MCU NPCs and stans may say that the show's finale was a bold attempt at meta humor, but I beg to differ. You can only earn that type of finale if you've successfully built a show with a very specific satirical and humorous tone. Let me show you an example. In 1966, on The Monkees, a show that was considered revolutionary in its fourth wall breaking and meta humor, Mickey Dolenz walks off set into the writer's room. Much like Jen, he says he wants them to write something more hip. In Mickey's case, the writers are a bunch of elderly Asian men, which makes the whole situation even more absurd. For those of you unfamiliar, The Monkees was a show that was built upon over-the-top surreal and physical humor, so when the fourth wall-breaking writer's scene happens, it is earned. The She-Hulk writers, on the other hand, haven't earned or accomplished anything, as most of their so-called jokes throughout the series have failed to land. That's because the show was based around mean-spirited digs at men, with no punchlines whatsoever. Arbitrarily calling something a comedy doesn't make it a comedy, and doing the fourth wall breaking and having the lead character say that the storylines aren't well written doesn't excuse you from writing poor storylines. I'm pretty sure that the writers of this show probably thought this was a clever way to explain how they've written themselves into a corner, but people aren't that stupid. It's obviously a cop-out, and the fact that there were so many rumors of extensive reshoots for this show doesn't help their case. This just looks like a cheap, gimmicky way to get out of a poorly written show that wasn't well received. Now, just to be clear, a good satire show can make fun of everything, including men, but there's one catch. If the show is billed as a comedy, it has to deliver some laughs, and this show absolutely didn't do that. After reading the showrunner's comments on Variety, it's absolutely clear why it wasn't funny. The writers had an agenda to attack men, and even Kevin Feige, the real Kevin, not the robot, understands that, which is probably why he frantically announced a Deadpool and Wolverine team-up movie for 2024. But the fact that he would let this article be published in Variety says a lot about where he's at these days and what he's become. A company man. On a final note, one of the things that disappointed me the most about the post-finale interview was that Tatiana Maslany joined in on attacking the fans. For the most part, even the show's harshest critics, myself included, had repeatedly pointed out that she was a good actress and probably the only good thing about the show. Considering how poorly written She-Hulk was, I would have seen this as a silver lining and walked away from it. By attacking the viewers, Tatiana Maslany has lost a lot of goodwill from me, which is a shame because I had genuinely liked her prior. On a more personal note, I want to thank the many people who have supported me and encouraged me to make these She-Hulk videos in recent months. I've had a chance to interact with many of you and really enjoyed all of our great interactions. I would love to see some comments from you this time too, and if you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing to my channel and clicking on that wonderful notification bell. Thanks for watching, my friends. Thank you, and good day.
I am such an awesome guy. I make so many videos.